Every company on the planet has the same problem, and almost none of them know it exists. Right now, your employees are losing nearly 3 hours every single day, not to laziness, not to distraction, but to searching for information they already have, but making decisions that they've already made. I built and scaled a 1,000-person company. I sat inside hundreds of boardrooms across law, finance, construction, consulting, and the problem is everywhere. Multiply those 3 hours by every knowledge worker on the planet, and you've got a $20 trillion hole sitting inside the global economy. The insane part, AI was supposed to fix it, but actually it's making it a lot worse. The crux of the issue is that our knowledge and the atomic unit of knowledge is not files. Today our systems are all about files, meeting notes, emails, PDFs, presentations, financials, or they're sitting inside systems. On the flip side, what you've got are models that are all about really syllables, tokens. But the human mind thinks about information in concepts. What's a document? It's a collection of concepts. What's a meeting? It's a collection of concepts. And the problem is we're spending so much time trying to find files and then finding the relevant piece of information, the concept inside the file, that we're wasting a lot of energy and wasting a lot of cost. And it boils down to the fact that our file system no longer maps back to how we think. And I think that's critical. When you had a low number of files and a low number of emails, it was much easier. But when it all increased, and now we have so much information, actually we spend all our time trying to search for it because we've got copies, duplicates. And with AI, it's become even more because now we're generating more, we're producing more information. There's more word salad, as someone told me this morning. And so trying to actually get to the bottom of what is it that we're actually trying to look for is so much more important now than ever before. So if you think about this, the average person is spending 3 hours a day looking for information. What if you could make that 5 minutes or 10 minutes? 3 hours a day is a lot. Now you imagine in a law firm, how much the time the paralegals are spending in deduplicating a document, redacting documents, finding information, pulling down a precedence, or in a consulting company, how many times are we regenerating the same report, but writing it from scratch? So much of the issue of knowledge is both about actually spending time redoing it again and again, or worst of all, contradicting ourselves. And that's a critical part of the problem. And it boils down to the fact that businesses don't have shared knowledge. Now, we're only making this problem worse when you start adding AI on top, because what you're really doing is you're taking human dysfunction and you're operating it at machine scale. Now you have lots of agents with silos of information that don't know the other part of the information, but they work 24/7, and depending on how well they've been programmed or not well they've been programmed, you're producing more information that's being more siloed, more repetitive, more all over the place. And that ends up being this horrible flywheel to get out of. And actually what you're really after is saying, well, what are the atomic units of knowledge that make up my business? And then I might repeat it, much like Lego, 60 times. But at least I know what I'm repeating, and I can start to make sure things are more reusable. Reusable primitives is what sort of we call it. So when we think about cognition or intelligence or meaning, it's got to be stored somewhere. And so we wrote a research paper. I spent a bunch of the summer actually in the early part of autumn writing it, which is, well, what is the ecology of our cognition? And we realized sort of some really interesting things in it. So the first thing was knowledge is stored in 3 places. So meaning is stored in 3 places. It's either stored in your head, makes obvious sense. It's very well organized. It's stored in your ecosystem, your friends, your colleagues, the systems you access, or it's in the frontier. And the frontier is really interesting. It basically means you haven't yet accessed it. And so you've got these 3 spaces, right? Me, my ecosystem, and the frontier. And then what's really unique is as you go further into the frontier, the information becomes less organized. Kind of makes sense, right? Our minds are very well organized, but what we don't know is unorganized relative to us. So we call that entropy, right? Effectively, it's got a higher amount of entropy when you go further out and a lower amount of entropy when it's just in your head. And so that's really important to understand, because now you're like, oh, wow, okay, now I realize where things are. But this has huge impact. Think about creativity or ideas. Usually ideas come from when you, proximal knowledge, you interface with frontier knowledge, and then you bring it back to your team. So that's like going to a conference, watching someone speak, coming back to the team, discussing it, and then you have the eureka. And so creativity is all about fusion of ideas that existed across those 3 spaces, where you're really mixing the entropy, mixing the amount of organization, mixing the different ecologies together. And that's really powerful if done well. Now, why is that? Because if you imagine an organization, you might have someone in the finance team that is working on churn, and then you might have someone in the AI team that is working on churn. They will probably never talk to each other because they're working on a different kind of churn. But wouldn't it be great if suddenly you could connect those dots? And that's what we're really trying to do in the second round. You can connect those dots and say, you guys are actually all working on churn. Wouldn't it be better to compound that knowledge? So actually, the net result is bigger than the two things you almost put into it. And that's really the power of being able to bring together shared intelligence, but also understanding how do you bridge to new knowledge. Here's the number most knowledge workers never calculate: 446 hours a year. That's what you're losing to information friction, refining things you already know, re-explaining context to tools that already should have it. For a 10-person team, that's north of $330,000 a year earned. I wrote a 12-minute briefing that breaks down exactly where the cost hides and what a different architecture looks like. Links down below, you can download it for free. So companies keep making the same mistake for a number of reasons. Number one, there isn't shared intelligence within organizations. So the left hand and right hand actually are not completely in sync. So there used to be this really interesting theory called, I think it was called Price's Law, which said that the square root of any community produces 50% of the output. So if you're an organization of 4 people, that means 2, which is 50%. But now you're an organization of 400 people. Well, it's a completely different math, right? Because the square root of that is 20. And you're saying 20 people produce 200 people's worth of work. And that really comes down to because knowledge fragments if it's not shared. And this becomes sort of another problem, right? Because once knowledge starts to fragment, people start making the same decisions again because there's no trace of why a decision happened. You weren't able to see how something propagated. You weren't able to see how something has evolved because you're not running off the same shared plane, the same single pane of glass. And that becomes really important for organizations as they grow. So one of the things that we've been really interested in is this idea of how could we have a graph of thought? So just imagine this analogy. You're building a spaceship to go to Mars. And then, a year later, you're building a spaceship to go to Mercury. One would argue that maybe the first 5, 20, 30, 40, 50% of the things that you do across both of those are the same. In the way we work today, we're relying a lot on human conversation and serendipity to realize that they're actually the same. But the beauty is if you kept that graph of thought, we could reuse a lot of the thinking that's already being done and just branch off when we needed to. Just imagine that for a second. It's not just about reusable text or reusable features or reusable code or reusable conversation. It's about reusable parts of a decision so that every single time, the most important thing you're doing as an organization is you're compounding. And you cannot compound unless you actually have shared knowledge. And all the systems that we have today, they're only as good as the user. How many times has someone taken a notebook application? Lots of excitement for the first 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, the usage rate decays almost linearly. And so in a month's time, in 8 weeks' time, you're barely writing any notes into that application. The flip side of it is you had an AI note taker that joined so many of your meetings. And how many times did you actually open the notes? You only opened them to actually figure out when you needed to remember something. But what if you actually had notes being taken? The notes made themselves into action items. Those action items made their ways into a to-do list. They were then tracked. But that requires a lot of discipline in the organization. And actually, that's where having an AI chief of staff and a shared intelligence layer becomes so powerful, because suddenly you're able to make sure you close the loop, you compound knowledge, and that everyone has a single version of the truth, taking into account the permissions that it would normally have in the ordinary course of business. So look, a lot of AI implementation today, and we've seen the McKinsey report, 98% failure. A lot of it is wrappers around a language model, but actually the data is everywhere. There's no meaning around it. There's no understanding to it. And so you're really hoping that you get statistically the right answer back. The second thing I think what you're seeing is most organizations, they're putting the tool before the use case. So it's so important to first understand what is it that you're actually trying to solve. So we were speaking to a customer recently who, one of the systems that we've built, one of the early sort of applications of Second Brain is actually a system called Pulse, which aggregates your LinkedIn, Twitter, and we're bringing in a few more channels. But imagine being able to just have like this really short newspaper that's created for you that gives you a summary of what everyone that you're following, that you like following, has said over the last 24 hours. So it gives you like a quick recap, noise taken out, organized into themes, easy to read. And then you can sort of go through and see the posts and so on and so forth. Or you can create community digest from it. This wasn't about, can we use AI to do X? This was we need a way to create digests for our community. And then actually, we'd love it if we could just get a 24-hour recap of what our community is doing wherever they're doing it, whether it's on X, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's eventually on Reddit or on Discord. And so that's a really good example of a very simple use case of where then AI becomes really powerful. Another good example is people finding, right? I've sort of covered this before. But imagine being able, you're a 5,000 person organization. Does everyone know what everyone does? Does everyone know how they can get help from someone else? The same thing applies in any community. If you think about companies like WeWork, or you think about some of the free zones in the Middle East, they've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people there. The collective power of that insight is massive. But today it's not collective. It's completely disintermediated. And that's actually the real power of what AI can do. And you can centralize the knowledge, and then you can build software on top of it. You're giving people compounding power, and that's huge. Every company's intelligence is theirs. You could argue that across a vertical or across a region or a vertical and a region, there's a lot of similarity. But what this allows us to focus in on is the 10, 20% that is distinct. And the power then is that intelligence is yours. That concept graph is yours. That shared intelligence layer is your information. And so the power you have is you're compounding and building on top of your own information, your own intelligence, your own actions, your own decisions, own pattern matching. And that makes it really a really rich experience. Currently, we're speaking to lots of small businesses, lots of very, very large businesses, and we're really interested in what is the problem that you're trying to solve. Give us an example of a problem. And what I'm starting to see is it's like a giant game of Tetris. We're effectively seeing, what one industry's problem, people finder, is actually a solution for several industries. One industry's problem, case management or knowing the information that's related to a client, is also applicable in legal, is also applicable in consulting, is also applicable in accounting. The ability for many people in an organization to learn from each other without breaking the privacy of, say, a case or an account or a consulting contract. These are all problems that are actually existing in multiple verticals. So our whole view is, with this design partnership, is we're really interested in finding the first customer in a vertical that's trying to solve a problem, and we work with them to help solve it, to build a solution built on top of the Second Brain platform. And then the power is that they're also getting the compounding impact of everything else we've learned and everything else we've built. They should come to secondbrain.ai, get in touch with us. You can get us on X, you can get us on LinkedIn, tweet me, get in touch. And then we'd love to understand the problem, and we'll work out a solution from that. And obviously, if you're coming from an industry where we've already done some work, the real power is you can rapidly have one of those solutions. If you're a law firm or you're in consulting or in some of the other industries we've already done things for, you can get cracking quite quickly. One of the biggest issues is why AI still doesn't understand meaning, and that's a huge problem. You can watch the full video breakdown here.